This is SILL Talks, episode 22. Hello, Star Architects. Welcome to another insightful episode of the SILL Talks Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping architects build businesses that are profitable and sustainable. You know, the podcast where we go beyond design conversations and talk honestly about the business, structure, and reality of architecture practice. As always, I am your host, Egbeiyon Leonard, and today's episode is not going to be a motivational one, believe me. It's a practical reference episode. Now, this is the kind of episode you don't rush through. It is one you pause, you return to, and you use constantly. Now, today's episode is simple, but it might make some people uncomfortable. And it's simple and straightforward. Your firm is not you. And if that sentence makes you pause already, then this episode is for you. Because this episode is a practical guide to building an architectural practice, that works without you. Doesn't mean you're not there, but without relying heavily on you. What do I mean by your firm is not you? Let's get into the conversation. Now, let me start this conversation by being very clear. When I say your firm is not you, I'm not saying you are not important. I'm not saying you are not valuable. I'm not saying you are not the vision. Let's get that fact right. Because it's your firm. You are the big idea behind it. What I am saying is that a firm in itself is not a person. A firm is a system. A firm is a repeatable way of delivering an architectural value with or without the founder present. If, for example, work cannot move forward without you, if decisions cannot be made without you being at the center of it, if clients panic when you are simply unavailable, then what you have is not a firm. What you have is a founder-dependent practice. And this distinction, believe me, is not semantic. It affects everything from growth to peace of mind to how your staff develop and grow to even your long-term relevance. Now, here is a simple test I want you to keep in mind throughout this episode. If I step away for 30 days, what actually breaks? That question alone will reveal more to you than most business plans can tell you. So, why do architects struggle with this more than other professionals? Now, architects struggle with these problems more than most professionals. And the reasons, I believe, are not far from how we were trained. From school, we were trained to defend our own ideas personally. We own drawings emotionally. Studio culture rewards individual brilliance, and we all know this, not institutional thinking. Then we graduate and the profession reinforces it further. Firms are named after people. Clients are told they are hiring you. Reputation becomes personal currency. So slowly, without even realizing it, our identity fuses with output. Quality becomes something that lives in our head. Decisions become something only you can make. Control becomes mistaken for leadership. And before long, the firm revolves around your availability. And here actually is the hard truth. Architectural education trains excellent designers. It does not train institutional builders. And that gap is what this episode is meant to address. So, how do you know if your firm is actually just you right now? I'll be very practical. I'll be straightforward. I want you to listen to the following questions slowly that I will try and paint. Who can approve drawings without calling you in your firm right now? Who can speak to clients confidently without escalating? Who follows up payment without your involvement? Who makes technical decisions within, of course, defined limits? The moment you are tired, sick, or unavailable, what stops? Now, if the honest answer to most of these questions is me, that's the word me, and your clarity has simply just arrived. And clarity is not shame. Clarity is actually the starting point of redesigning. Now, here's the important line I want you to keep in mind. Wherever everything routes through you, the firm is congested. It's simple. Congestion is not strength. It's a structural weakness because, you can do much more. You can have much more freedom. But bottlenecks is not a good thing for any firm. And this brings me to the real cost of being too central. Founder dependency always feels manageable. Of course, at inception, when you are not taking so much, but then it becomes a problem. Now, the cost shows up quietly. First, you have decision fatigue. You are deciding everything from major contracts to minor approval, even as little as the kind of pen and paper you want to use in the office. Then secondly, staff stagnation. People stop thinking, they wait. Every small thing they escalate it to get to your table. They never grow into actually leading. And then the third thing is your client behavior starts to change. They bypass every process and then they negotiate your boundaries personally with you. They delay payments because relationship now all of a sudden feels informal, and eventually burnout arrives. Not because you're weak, but because your structure is wrong. To drive the point home, the more indispensable you are, the more fragile your company or your practice becomes. Now, real firms are not held together by heroics. No, they are held together by systems. And I'm sure I've mentioned this a couple of times in my previous episode, talking about building clear and workable systems for your firm. Now, what does a functional architectural practice look like? Let's hit the reset button and define it properly and paint a very clear picture. A functional architectural firm has certain characteristics, right? One, they have, clear roles. You have defined authority. Your processes are documented. You have decision pathways. You have quality standards that do not even depend on mood or presence of anybody. Good firms are boring in operation and excellent in output. Think like an architect for a moment. You don't just design buildings that collapse when one element is removed now. You design structure, you design redundancy, you design load paths. So let's ask ourselves, where is the structure of our firm? Where is the redundancy? Where does decision making actually sit? We know we want to control everything, but if everything is resting on one column, which is you in this case, of course you know that collapse is inevitable. It's only a matter of time. So let's do a live self-audit. I want you to audit your firm in your head, or you can take a piece of paper, look at it, and answer these silent questions. What are the top 5 things only I can do right now in my firm? Which of these can be taught, which can be documented, or which can be delegated? Now list out those things. Which of them are you holding on to out of fear, not necessity? Now, this list you have made is not a list of weakness. No, it is your design brief. You cannot redesign what you have actually refused to acknowledge. So this list you have made is supposed to help you to prepare you for what is to come. So how do you start separating yourself from the firm? You look at very practical steps. And I know that sometimes it seems like all this talk, these are things you can implement over time. It's not something that can be done in one day. It takes consistent small steps. So let me talk about implementation. This is where many architects, they overthink this thing. They think so much and then they don't eventually do anything. You don't need to fix this in one move, like I said. Do it gradually. So I'll take out the steps that I have been initiating in my own practice to get us to be able to operate, independent of the founders. And step 1 is to separate roles from names. Write down the roles, right? Not people. Decide what each of the role can approve or what they can escalate. right? Now, step 2 is to document one core process, just one. It can be either drawing review, client onboarding, or payment workflow. One process documented, believe me, is way better than 10 that you have in your head. Now, step 3, you need to create a decision ladder. Who decides what? At what level? When does it come to you? Now, I feel the need to just take a bit of a digression and share a quick experience from our practice SILL designs. Because this one is one of the areas that I have had to intentionally rework. For a long time, most decisions, big or small, found their way back to me and my business partner. Design clarification, client responses, minor approval, even matters we had already discussed previously. You find out that it still comes back to your table. At first, it didn't feel like a problem, but as we continue to grow over the years, we told ourselves it was about, maintaining standard. But over time, it became clear that something was wrong. The team was not failing to act as such, but they were waiting for permission from either me or my partner. Everything was being escalated to us, not because it required senior input, no, but because there was no clear structure defining who was allowed to decide what. There was a moment in particular, there was a project we were working on, a residential one, and this situation actually brought this thing to bear. It made it so obvious. Now, it was a relatively small design adjustment that was needed. Nothing strategic, nothing that would stall a workflow as such. Yet, that thing sat there unresolved for weeks, simply because no one was certain it could be approved without coming back to us. That delay, it cost us money because the client came back and then it was a whole lot of mess, and that delay affected momentum. It eventually led to, confidence. We had to own up to the fault. So it was a lot of mess. Now, that was a moment where we realized that, we needed to do something differently. The issue was not delegation of tasks, right? Because that particular case study, it could have easily, somebody would have handled it because it was a design. It was not an issue as such, but it became an issue eventually. It was, in our own case, was delegation of authority. Who could decide what was okay to go? So we paused and intentionally reworked our decision structure. We sat down and we clearly outlined what decision team members could make independently, what required the project lead to sign off, what genuinely needed to come back to us, the partners. Once those boundaries were made clear, things began to shift. Decisions moved faster. Team members started bringing solutions to you rather than just questions. Sometimes, even when they have a question, they will tell you, okay, so boss, I already have this, but I'm thinking I want to pick your thought on this. So they come with a solution, not just the questions. And when issues did come to us, they were strategic, not basic operational ones. And now that is what a decision ladder does. If everything comes to you, it doesn't always mean, people lack competence. Sometimes it simply means that the boundaries to which they are working are clear. And clarity more than control is what allows a firm to grow. So step 4 is to train for thinking. Train your people for thinking and not obedience. You need to ask your staff what they think. Let them decide within, your set boundaries. Review their outcomes, not the methods they used in getting there. So some of these steps will help you train your staff for thinking and not just yes sir every time. Now, step 5, you need to remove yourself from one workflow. You need to put it to the test. Let it run, observe it. Whatever you learn, you refine it. Remember, you are not losing control. You are simply relocating control into structure. And when you have gotten it, you need to now start redefining the founder's role. At some point, every serial founder must shift identity. I think it's a necessity because you need to quit from being the engine to being the architect of the systems behind the engine. Your real responsibilities now shift from what you were doing, controlling everything, to vision, the standards, the hiring, what is the culture of your practice. Your focus becomes external relationships, not micromanagement, not constant approval, not firefighting, right? So here's something I want you to keep in mind. Your job is not to be needed. Your job is to make the firm reliable to your clients. And that in itself, I consider it as, leadership maturity. So how do we move from what we currently have to having peace, to being able to scale and then, build a long-term practice? It's simple. Structure in itself is not just about money or growth. It's about peace of mind. It's about health. It's about family. You want to spend time with your family. You want longevity. You need to have a succession plan for your practice. A firm that works without anxiety is a professional achievement on its own. Freedom is not doing nothing. Freedom is knowing that things work. Now ask yourself, what kind of firm am I building? One that needs my energy or one that survives my absence? You see, that question is something that you may spend the next couple of years trying to find answer to. And when you find the answer, it's important that you begin to internalize it, you document it, because this thing I have just stated is not something that happens overnight. Forgive yourself for the mistakes, but the goal here is to get clear directions on how do you want to position your practice. Because a practice that is, the vision is clear and that maintains standard will most likely make more money, because at the end of the day, yes, growth in our client may be measured by money. Sometimes it is measured by how far you've come, the consistent steps, the growth, and how do you, the KPI for measuring growth. Your firm, your staff, how happy are they? How willing are they to go into the unknown with you? These are the KPIs that we use as SILL designers to measure how far we have come. Knowing that our firm is not us is something that has been in the works for the past 3 to 4 years. So if you are not there yet, do not be disheartened. It's something that can be achieved. It's something that needs to be achieved. So it takes consistent small steps to get there. All right. So now, before we close, let's take a moment and look at what this episode has actually shown in practical terms. If you remember nothing else, you need to remember this. Your firm is not you. The goal is not to remove yourself completely. Don't get that wrong. The goal is to remove dependency on you. Now, here are the key takeaways to carry forward. The first thing is, a firm is a system and not a personality. If work, decisions and quality only exist in your head, then the firm cannot grow beyond you. It's important to know that. Secondly, founder dependency is a common thing, but it's not sustainable. It's something that is everywhere, but it's not sustainable. It comes from how we were trained, not from how firms actually survive. So this episode is supposed to help us even understand that, many architectural practices, even the big ones that you know their names, are dependent on their founder. And it's a common thing. So the third one is, where everything routes through you, congestion exists. And congestion leads to delay, it leads to burnout, it leads to weak client boundaries, because everything becomes you. There's no separation between your practice and you. Your practice is an entity on its own and needs to be treated as such. Now, the fourth one is, we looked at real firms being boring, but yet have excellent, output. They rely on roles, processes, and standards, not constant micromanaging. And the fifth thing is, you cannot fix these things overnight. You fix it gradually by separating roles from names, by documenting, one process at a time. You're creating decision boundaries. You are training your people to think and not just yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. And we also looked at the sixth one, saying the founder's job is reliability, not heroism. You are not there to, to decide on the color of the desk you should be having. Yes, there might be important moments, but the major focus is to train your people to work without you being there. Because when the vision is clear, every part can almost function on their own. And that is the goal of every thriving practice that the future is setting to make money and do good for humanity. And finally, structure is not about ego or control. It's about peace, longevity, and professional maturity. So even if one of these points stood out to you, believe me, that's your starting point. You don't have to get everything right at once. Even if just one, that is more than enough. So let me end this with, I've said this again, your firm is not you. Separate your business account. That is still as rudimentary as possible. Separate your business account from your personal account. And accepting that does not diminish your value. Your firm is not you. It multiplies it. Now, the moment you begin to design your firm, the way you design buildings, with structures in place, with intention, everything changes. All right. Thank you guys for listening to the SILL Talks Podcast. As usual, my name is Egbeiyon Leonard, and it has been a humble ride with you guys on this episode 22. Thank you for sticking with me to the end. I will see you in the next conversation. Bye.